Take out your phone. Somewhere inside it is the smallest piece of plastic you own, and it is the key to almost every account you have. Now here is the part that should bother you. That key can be moved to somebody else's phone while yours is still in your hand. You would not get a warning. The first thing you would notice is that your signal disappeared. In 1 year, the FBI logged over 2,000 of these in the United States alone, and more than $72 million gone. In the next half hour, I will show you exactly why this works, what the regulator finally forced the carriers to do about it, and the 4 settings that actually protect you. I am not going to tell you how to do it. There is nothing in this episode anyone could follow. What there is the reason it keeps working. Let us start with the object itself, because almost everyone has the mental model slightly wrong, and the wrong model is what makes the attack surprising. A SIM is a subscriber identity module. It is genuinely a tiny computer, a secure chip with its own processor and its own protected storage. What it holds is not really your phone number. It holds a subscriber identity and a secret key that proves that identity to the network. When your phone connects to a mast, it is not announcing a number. It is proving cryptographically that it holds the key belonging to a particular subscriber account. Your phone number is something else entirely. It is a label, and it lives in a database at your carrier, pointing at whichever subscriber identity the carrier says it points at. Read that sentence again, because the whole episode is inside it. The number is a pointer. The pointer lives at the carrier. It is not in your phone at all, which means moving your number is not a technical attack on your handset. Nobody has to break the chip or the encryption or anything in your pocket. They have to change one row in a database. That is the whole thing. The number stops pointing at your SIM and starts pointing at theirs. And that operation is not a bug. It is a feature the system is required to have, which is why it cannot simply be switched off. Think about the ordinary reasons a number has to move. You lose your phone. It gets stolen. It goes in a river. You buy a new handset that takes a different SIM format. You switch carrier and expect to keep the number you've had for 15 years. Every one of those is a legitimate request from a real customer who genuinely cannot prove anything with the device, because the device is the thing that is gone. So the system has to have a path that works for someone with no phone. And a path that works for someone with no phone works for someone who never had yours. That is the shape of the problem, and I want to be honest that it is a hard one rather than a stupid one. The recovery path is the attack surface. It always is. What makes it worse is what got attached to that number over the last 15 years, without anyone really deciding to. Because in the 90s, a phone number was a way to reach a person. That is all it was. Nobody was defending it. Then it quietly became something else, and it happened one convenient feature at a time, which is how these things always happen. Your number became your login, then your password reset, then your second factor, then, for a lot of services, your proof of identity. Nobody sat down and designed that. It accumulated, and the security of the whole pile ended up resting on a pointer in a carrier's database. A pointer that, by design, has to be movable by a customer who cannot prove they hold the original device. When you put it like that, the surprising thing is not that SIM swapping exists, it is that it took until the 2010s for it to become a profession. And it did become a profession. Not a prank, not a curiosity, an organized way of taking money from people, with specialization and division of labor. Let me put some weight on why the phone number in particular became such a valuable thing to steal. Two-factor authentication is genuinely one of the better ideas in consumer security. Something you know, plus something you have. The password is the thing you know. The second factor is meant to be a thing you physically possess, so that a stolen password alone is not enough. And when it was rolled out to hundreds of millions of ordinary people, the industry needed a second factor that everybody already had, with no app to install. So it used text messages, which was a completely reasonable engineering decision in about 2011 and has aged very badly. Because a text message is not something you have. It is something sent to a pointer in a database that a stranger can ask to have moved. The second factor turned out to be the same kind of thing as the first, a piece of information held by a third party, protected by a customer service process. Now stack the account recovery flow on top of that, because that is the part people forget, and it is worse than the login. Most services will let you into an account you are locked out of if you can receive a message at the registered number. That is the point of the feature, which means the number does not just guard the front door, it is a master key that opens the door regardless of whether you know the password at all. And a master key is exactly the right way to think about the economics, because it explains who gets targeted and why. If a criminal can only steal one thing from you, the number is the highest value single item, because everything else can be reset from it. Email first, usually, because email is itself the recovery path for everything else. Take the email and you take the estate. Then whatever holds money, exchange accounts, brokerage, banking, anything where value can be moved quickly and is difficult to claw back. And that is why cryptocurrency holders were so heavily hit in the first wave, not because crypto is uniquely insecure, but because the transactions are final. A bank transfer can sometimes be reversed. A card payment can be disputed. A completed blockchain transaction cannot be recalled by anybody. So the same attack, aimed at the same kind of account, pays out differently depending on whether the money can be pulled back afterwards. Which also tells you something useful in the other direction, and it is a piece of good news I will come back to at the end. Your exposure is not evenly spread. It is concentrated in a small number of accounts, and you can find out which ones tonight. Most people have somewhere between 2 and 5 accounts where a successful takeover would be genuinely serious, and a long tail where it would be an annoyance. The long tail is not where the effort should go. Almost nobody sorts their accounts that way, and that is the actual gap, right? So that is why the number is worth taking. Now the harder question, and the one I have to handle carefully, why does the request to move a number get approved? And here I am going to describe the shape of the problem and deliberately not the method. I want to be straightforward with you about that choice rather than pretend the detail does not exist. It exists. It is documented in court records, and it is not going in this episode. What I will say is structural, and it is enough to understand the risk and to protect yourself, which is the entire purpose of knowing this. A carrier moving a number has to answer one question. Is the person asking the person who owns this account? And they have to answer it at scale in a few minutes for a customer who by definition may not have the phone. Every method of answering it relies on the requester knowing things about the account holder. That is the category. That is all I am going to say about the category. And the problem with facts about you as a form of proof is that facts about you are not secret, and they get less secret every year. Data breaches put them in bulk collections. Social media puts them out voluntarily. Public records hold a great deal more than most people expect. So the authentication was resting on a category of information that the internet has spent 20 years making freely available. That is failure mode 1, and it is the honest core of this. The check was never strong, and the world got much better at defeating it. Failure mode 2 is that carriers are enormous, with vast numbers of frontline staff, high turnover, and stores operated by third parties. Court records in prosecuted cases have shown employees being paid to process fraudulent swaps, not as a theory, as a finding of fact in specific cases. I am going to be careful here. That is established in particular cases against particular people. It is not a claim that this is routine, and I am not going to characterize anyone who has not been convicted. But it matters structurally because it defeats every improvement to the identity check. If the person performing the check is compromised, the check is irrelevant. Failure mode 3 is the one I find most interesting because it is nobody's fault and it is the hardest to fix. Speed. The entire business is optimized for resolving a customer's problem quickly because that is what customers actually want and what the industry is measured on. A process designed to get a stranded customer back on the network in 10 minutes is, unavoidably, a process that can be completed in 10 minutes. Security and customer service pull in opposite directions here, and for a very long time, customer service was winning because that is what got measured. Now put those three together, because the combination is what made this a business rather than an incident. Information about you is cheap. Some frontline access can be bought, and the process is built to be fast. What comes out of that is an attack that requires no exploit, no malware, and no technical skill of the kind people imagine when they hear the word hacking. It is an attack on a business process, and you cannot patch a business process the way you patch software. You have to change what the business is willing to do, which is exactly why this one needed a regulator in the end, and why nothing much changed until one arrived. Hold that thought. Because before the regulator arrived, something else did. The courts. In 2019, a 20-year-old named Joel Ortiz became the first person in the United States convicted for SIM swapping. The charges concerned 13 SIM swaps and the theft of more than $5 million in cryptocurrency from multiple victims. He was sentenced to 10 years. For a defendant of that age with that profile, that is a very heavy sentence, and it was meant to be read as one. I want to stay precisely inside what the court established, because that is the rule in this program, and this is a living person. He accessed cell phone accounts fraudulently, had numbers swapped to devices he controlled, and used that access to take cryptocurrency. That is the finding. Nothing beyond it is mine to add. What the case established mattered more than the individual, and it established two things that the industry had been arguing about. First, that this was prosecutable as serious theft rather than as some vague computer misuse offense with a light tariff attached to it. Second, and more usefully, that the mechanism was real. Before that conviction, there was a persistent line that these were careless victims who had lost their own credentials. 13 swaps, one defendant, $5 million. That is not 13 careless people. That is a repeatable method. Around the same period, the civil side started moving, and the best known example is Michael Turpin, a cryptocurrency investor and a SIM swap victim. He brought litigation over what happened to him, including a suit against his carrier, AT&T. And now, I have to do something slightly unusual, which is tell you a number I am not going to tell you. There is a figure that circulates constantly with this case. I went looking for it properly, and the reachable sources do not agree on the amount, and they do not agree on who it was against. So I am not saying it. In an episode about how people get defrauded, a confidently wrong number would be a strange thing to hand you. What matters legally is the question the litigation put on the table, and that question is a good one. If the carrier controls the pointer and the carrier's own process is what moved it to a criminal, what exactly does the carrier owe the customer? For most of the 2010s, the industry's answer was, in effect, very little. Your service agreement limited liability and the loss was somewhere else, in an account the carrier did not hold. Litigation started pushing on that answer, and regulators eventually stopped waiting for the courts to finish. But before we get to the rules, you need the scale. Because the scale is what forced the issue, and the numbers are genuinely startling. And these are not industry estimates or vendor marketing, these are complaints filed with the FBI. Which, I should say plainly, means they are a floor and not a total. Reported crime always is. Nobody reports being embarrassed. Plenty of losses never get filed anywhere at all. Keep that in mind for every figure in the next few minutes. The FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, publishes what the public reports to it. Here is what SIM swapping looks like in that data. Start with the baseline. From January 2018 through December 2020, 3 full years, IC3 received 320 SIM swap complaints. Adjusted losses across those 3 years came to about $12 million. $12 million over 3 years. Serious for the people involved, but as a category, it is a rounding error next to the rest of the report. Then 2021. In that single year, 1,611 complaints and more than $68 million in adjusted losses. 1 year against the previous 3, 5 times the complaints, nearly 6 times the money. That is the shape of something being industrialized. Not a trend line, a step change, and the step happens in 1 year. Then, 2022, 2026 complaints, and more than $72 million. Still climbing. And that is the number in the title of this episode because it is the peak of the reported series. So in 4 years, the category went from a curiosity to $72 million a year of reported losses in one country. It is worth asking why the ramp happened exactly then. And I think there are 3 reasons that all arrive together. 1. The value on the other side went up enormously. The accounts being taken over in 2021 were worth vastly more than the same accounts in 2018. 2. SMS. Two-factor reached near universal adoption in exactly that window. The attack became worth doing because the target became worth having. 3. The method got written down and shared. Once a technique is documented in a community, it stops needing talent and starts needing only willingness. That last one is the general lesson of this program, honestly. Attacks do not scale when they are clever. They scale when they become instructions. Now, at this point in the story, you would expect me to give you the 2023 number, and I am not going to, and I want to tell you why. I could not source it directly. Not from IC3's own reporting in a form I was willing to put in front of you. So rather than reach for a secondary summary and hope, I'm going to step over that year and say plainly that there is a gap in what I'm showing you. The trend survives the gap, and I would rather you know exactly where the floorboard is missing than have me paint over it. Because between 2022 and the next figure I do have, something significant happened. A regulator finally moved. And what that regulator did is, in my view, one of the more sensible pieces of consumer security rulemaking in the last decade. It did not try to fix the technology, which was never the problem. It went after the business process, which always was. On the 15th of November 2023, at its open meeting, the Federal Communications Commission adopted a report and order on SIM swap and port out fraud. Port out is the sibling attack, and it is worth 30 seconds. A SIM swap moves your number to a different SIM on the same carrier. A port out moves your number to a different carrier entirely. Same theft, different door, and the rules treat them as one problem correctly. The compliance date for those rules was the 8th of July, 2024, so they became real obligations in the middle of last year. And the requirements read like somebody actually studied how the attacks worked, which is not always true of rulemaking in this area. First, carriers must use reasonable methods to authenticate a requester's identity before transferring a number to a different SIM or a different provider. That sounds obvious. It was not previously a federal requirement, and that is precisely the point of writing it down. Second, they must have a defined process for handling failed authentication attempts, rather than simply letting someone try repeatedly until something works. Third, and this is the one that helps victims most, the carrier must notify the customer of a SIM change or port out request. Notification converts a silent theft into a loud one. It does not stop the swap. It collapses the window in which nobody knows. And that window is everything, because the losses in these cases are made in the first hours, while the victim still thinks they have a network fault. Fourth, and this is the one I want you to act on tonight. Carriers must offer an account lock, a setting that says, do not move my number to another SIM or another carrier, full stop, until I turn this off deliberately. That is a switch that converts the whole attack from a customer service problem into something that requires you to participate. It is free. It exists on your account right now. And a large majority of people have never turned it on because nobody told them it was there. Fifth and sixth are less visible and matter more than they sound. Mandatory employee training and record-keeping requirements. Record-keeping is the unglamorous one that changes behavior because it makes patterns of internal abuse findable after the fact. And the rules apply to prepaid as well as postpaid service, and to resellers, the smaller brands that run on somebody else's network. That last detail matters rules that cover only the big three would simply move the attacks to whoever was left out, which is what usually happens. The FCC also required that the authentication methods work for the full range of customers, people without data plans, without data-capable phones, with disabilities or accommodation needs. Which sounds like boilerplate and is not. A security control that only works for a confident customer with a modern smartphone excludes exactly the people most likely to be targeted. So that is the regime that came into force in July 2024. Now, be honest question. Did any of it work? And I am going to answer that carefully because this is exactly the place where a program like this one would normally overclaim. Here is the figure I do have for 2024, and it goes the right way. In 2024, US SIM swap complaints to IC3 came to 982 with about $26 million in reported losses. Set that against 2022, 2,026 complaints and over $72 million. Complaints down by more than half. Reported losses down by roughly 2/3. That is a substantial fall in a crime category, and in a field where the numbers usually only go one way, it deserves to be said clearly. And now the part I am not going to skip. That is a correlation. It is not proof that the rules caused it, and I cannot show you that they did. At least 3 other things moved in the same window, and each of them would push the number in the same direction on its own. The value of the accounts being targeted moved a great deal across that period, and the profitability of the attack moves with it. Law enforcement attention increased sharply after the first convictions, which changes the risk side of the same calculation. And reporting behavior itself may have shifted in either direction, which is the awkward one because it is the least measurable. So the honest summary is this: the rules landed, the numbers fell, and the account lock requirement is a plausible part of why. Plausible is the strongest word the evidence supports, and I would rather give you plausible with the reasoning attached than certain with nothing behind it. There is also a less comfortable possibility, and it would be dishonest of me to leave it out. Attacks do not usually stop. They move. If one route gets harder, effort goes to the next easiest route against the same target. And the same account recovery weakness exists in plenty of other places that no telecoms regulator has jurisdiction over. So a fall in SIM swap complaints is not proof that fewer accounts are being taken over. It is proof that fewer of them are being taken over this particular way. Which, for you personally, is still good news. Because the defenses I am about to give you are aimed at the underlying weakness, not at the specific route. And that is the right way to think about protecting yourself generally. Defend the recovery path, not last year's attack. So let us do the practical part, and I want to be specific enough that you can actually go and do it rather than vaguely alarmed. Everything in the next few minutes is a published recommendation from the FBI or a right the FCC has already given you. None of it is my invention, and all 4 are free. Number 1, turn on the account lock with your carrier and do it before anything else on this list. It goes by different names depending on who you are with. Number transfer lock, port freeze, SIM protection, wording varies. It is in your account settings or in the carrier's app, and if you cannot find it, it is a reasonable thing to phone and ask for by name. This is the single highest value thing in this episode, because it is the only one that blocks the mechanism itself, rather than limiting the damage. And since July 2024, your carrier is required to offer it. You are not asking for a favor. You are asking for something they must provide. Number 2, get your 2-factor codes off SMS for anything that holds money or controls other accounts. An authenticator app generates codes on your device. There is no message, so there is nothing to intercept, and moving your number does not move your codes. A hardware security key is better still. It is a physical object that has to be present, and it cannot be socially engineered out of a call center. For most people, the app is the right answer, and the whole migration takes about 20 minutes for the accounts that matter. And I would say this, SMS 2-factor is still far better than no 2-factor. If it is all the service offers, keep it. This is about upgrading where you can, not about panic. Number 3, and this is the one nobody does. Audit what your phone number can reset. Go into the accounts that matter and look specifically at the recovery options, not the login settings. Those are different screens and people only ever check the first one. Because you can put a hardware key on your email and still leave a recovery path that lets a text message undo all of it. That is the failure I would most expect in a careful person's setup. A strong front door and an unlocked back one added years ago for convenience and never reviewed. Start with email, because email is the recovery path for everything else. Then whatever holds money. That is usually the whole job. Remember what we said earlier? Your exposure is concentrated in a handful of accounts. You do not have to fix the internet. You have to fix about 5 things. Number 4 is not a setting. It is a reflex, and it is the one that decides how much a successful attack actually costs you. If your phone loses service for no reason, treat it as a security event until proven otherwise. Not a network fault, not a dead area, sudden loss of signal on a working phone when the people around you have service. That is the one symptom every victim account has in common, and almost everybody spends the critical window assuming it is the network. Because that is the reasonable assumption. In the ordinary case, it is the network, and you will feel slightly silly. Being slightly silly costs you 5 minutes. Contact your carrier by another route, someone else's phone, the app over Wi-Fi, the website. Do not wait to see whether it comes back on its own. And if it is a swap, the time between it happening and you noticing is the entire budget the attacker has to work with. Everything you save comes off theirs. That is the 4. Lock the number, move the codes, audit the recovery paths, treat lost signal as an alarm. None of it costs anything, and all of it is done from a chair in under an hour. And I will say the uncomfortable part out loud, the reason this list matters is that you cannot outsource it. The carrier holds the pointer, but you hold the settings. So before I let you go, here are the 4 things you can actually do, in the order I would do them, and then one idea underneath all of it. The first thing, if you do nothing else today, turn on the number transfer lock with your carrier. It is free, you are entitled to it, and it is the only one that blocks the mechanism itself. The second thing, if you have an account that holds money, move its 2-factor codes off text messages and onto an authenticator app tonight. 20 minutes for the accounts that matter. The third thing, start with your email and ask yourself what a text message alone could reset. Look for the recovery settings, not the login settings. Those are different screens and almost nobody checks the second one. And the fourth, next time your phone loses signal for no reason, treat it as an alarm rather than a network fault. Watch for it and check by another route before you wait it out. Underneath all 4 is this. Your phone number was never designed to be a credential. It became one by accumulation because it was convenient and nobody went back to ask whether it could carry the weight. 320 complaints across 3 years became 2,026 in a single year, and it took a federal rulemaking to bend that line back down. The system will offer you a lock. It will never be the thing that closes it. Next time on systems you use every day, the thing you're almost certainly connected to right now, Wi-Fi, and specifically WPA2, the security standard that protected essentially every home network on Earth for well over a decade. We will look at what it actually does, the flaw that was found in it years after it became universal, and why your router probably still supports it anyway. Same question as always, something you use every day that you have never once had a reason to think about. If this was worth your half hour, follow the channel. That is genuinely all I ask. And go and turn the lock on. Do it before you forget. I will see you in the next one.